Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show that gives you the intellectual shortcut you need to be seriously well-informed.
Today, we are opening up a stack of sources that will, I think, fundamentally rewire how you think about safety, security, and risk.
I agree. The material is dense, but the insight you're about to get is so incredibly actionable. It doesn't matter if you're managing a huge company or, just trying to keep your own projects from falling apart.
Right.
Our mission today is to pretty much tear up the conventional security playbook. Because what these sources suggest is that most organizations, and honestly most of us, are operating under this massive invisible lie.
And what's the lie?
The lie is that true security is something you can achieve through perfect defense, that you can just eliminate all threats.
It's the ultimate feel-good assumption, isn't it? But it leads to some dangerously flawed planning. So many teams invest heavily, but only in prevention. They're acting like nothing will ever catastrophically go wrong.
It's like building a fortress, but refusing to look at the geological survey that shows a fault line running right underneath it.
Exactly.
And that inability, that refusal to look directly at failure, that's what we're tackling. We're moving from this impossible goal of absolute prevention.
Which would require infinite money, infinite resources.
Totally. We're moving to the pragmatic reality of defining and managing acceptable tolerance levels. The core idea here is really profound. Security isn't about getting rid of all risk. It's about making conscious, deliberate choices about what you're willing to tolerate and, just as importantly, what you are not.
This is the necessary reality check. Look, we all operate on hope. Hope the backup works, hope the attack fails, hope the system doesn't crash.
Yeah.
And that hope is vital. It keeps teams going. But real resilience that demands you look a vulnerability and failure right in the eye.
So before we get into the hard numbers, I want to ask you, our listener, to just confront that optimism for a second. Think about it. What's that one immediate vulnerability in your daily life or work? That old piece of software, that one shaky process that you're secretly just hoping won't break? Hold on to that thought.
Yeah, hold that thought. Because accepting failure starts with knowing where it's most likely to hit you.
Okay, so let's move to the bedrock of this new way of thinking, which is defining acceptable loss.
Right. And in any high-stakes environment, the question that everyone avoids is the hardest one. What happens when something does break? And, more to the point, which of those failures can we actually live with?
We have to face the fact that loss is, well, it's inevitable. The sources are crystal clear on this. Every system, every project, every organization, it's eventually going to lose something.
It might be tangible, like data or money.
Or it could be intangible, like trust or your reputation or just time. The question isn't if you'll lose something, but what you'll lose, and how much you're prepared to sacrifice to protect the really important stuff.
Exactly. So we define acceptable loss as the maximum damage an organization can take without that damage, cascading into a catastrophic failure or an existential threat.
It's the line in the sand.
It is. It's the highest point on the damage scale you can hit and still be okay, still be operationally viable.
But how do you quantify that? I mean, it's easy to measure the cost of losing a server, but how do you put a number on losing trust?
That's where the hard work comes in. The sources explain that you have to convert those soft losses into hard metrics. So loss of trust, for example, might be quantified as, say, an expected 5% drop in customer retention over the next quarter, or a specific drop in market value tied to that reputation damage.
So you're turning an emotional response into a line item, into a cost center you can actually budget for.
You have to. It makes the calculation clear.
Okay, let's look at the example of the big retailer during peak season. They consciously tolerate a 0.1% transaction failure rate.
Yep, 0.1%.
Yep.
It sounds tiny, but it's a huge strategic decision.
Because they're accepting that minor loss, the financial cost, and the customer annoyance from that 0.1% to avoid two much worse outcomes.
Right. The first is spending a fortune trying to get to an impossible 0.0% failure rate. And the second is risking a total system shutdown by tweaking it too much.
So the resources saved by not chasing perfection are instead put into rapid recovery for the other 99.9%.
Precisely. It's clarity replacing anxiety. It tells you exactly where to put your resources.
Okay, so let me ask you, listening now, if you had to name one type of loss that is absolutely non-negotiable for you, a catastrophic failure your career or your business could not survive, what would it be? Use this idea to define your own boundaries. And hey, let us know in the comments below.
Now that we've got that foundation of loss, let's quantify tolerance a bit more. We can move it to two very measurable areas, downtime and exposure.
Downtime. I mean, that's probably the most visceral one. When the systems stop, everything stops. Revenue, service, trust.
But just like loss, some downtime is inevitable. The goal of defining your tolerance for it is just to guide smart investments in things like redundancy and your response plans.
So how do you do that?
Well, the sources lay out this really helpful spectrum of tolerance. It shows that not all systems are created equal, so their protection budgets shouldn't be equal either. At the very top, you have systems with pretty much zero tolerance.
Like hospital emergency networks.
Exactly. Or high-frequency trading systems,
Yeah.
where a few minutes of downtime is a complete disaster.
Okay, then you move down the scale a bit. For, say, a big e-commerce site, you might accept a tolerance measured in minutes.
But probably only during a scheduled, pre-announced maintenance window, and a calculated pause to prevent a much worse, unannounced crash.
Makes sense. And further down.
Further down, you get to systems where tolerance is measured in hours. This could be for internal tools, like an HR system or a marketing website. If it goes down overnight, it's not great, but it's not stopping the whole business.
And at the very bottom, you've got stuff that can handle extended outages. This would be for, what, archive systems, old data that's rarely ever accessed.
That's the one. Legacy data repositories. Stuff that needs to be kept, but not necessarily online 24/7. What's really interesting here is that the cost to move a system from that hours category up to minutes or zero, it's often an exponential jump in price.
So this forces managers to actually justify that massive expense. You can't just say everything is critical.
You can't. It forces an economic equation to drive the security investment, not just fear.
Okay, that brings us to the second measurable dimension, acceptable exposure. This sounds like you're just choosing to live with known problems.
That is pretty much what it is. Exposure is about the vulnerabilities or attack surfaces that an organization consciously accepts. Not because of laziness, but because of economic and operational pragmatism.
The classic example has to be legacy systems, right?
Oh, absolutely. The ancient but critical piece of software that only one person in the company knows how to run, and they're retiring next month.
We've all seen it.
So imagine a critical inventory system running on, I don't know, a 30-year-old database. It has known security holes that can't be patched. But replacing it would cost millions and maybe take the business offline for months.
So the risk of replacing it is actually seen as higher than the risk of the known vulnerability.
If it's managed correctly, yes. And that's the key. The sources say you have to implement compensating controls. You accept the old database, but you put it on its own tiny segmented network. You monitor all the traffic going to it. You lock down who can access it.
You manage the risk even if you can't fix the flaw itself.
You got it. And this leads directly to something called a risk acceptance memo.
Which sounds very formal.
It has to be. It's a formal document that records the decision, proves that leadership understands the trade-offs, and commits everyone to review it regularly. It turns acceptance from just being apathy into actual accountability.
Okay, so we've covered loss, time, and technical exposure. Now we need to talk about the human side of failure, the chaos, what the sources call acceptable confusion.
Right, because when things break, it gets messy. Confusion is that operational disruption, the miscommunication, the user friction that just happens during an incident. It's unavoidable, so you have to plan for it. Planning for chaos is what prevents outright panic.
But how do you set boundaries for something as, well, as messy as confusion?
You set boundaries around the impact of that confusion. So the sources use this great example of a financial firm during a cyber attack. They might accept a temporary degradation of customer service.
Like a 2-hour wait time on the phone?
Or a 2-day delay on certain wire transfers. Yeah. They accept that friction for customers because the alternative, letting unauthorized people access accounts, is so much worse. They're prioritizing security over immediate convenience.
So they're basically managing the story of the failure.
Absolutely. That boundary is what separates a controlled response from a full-blown meltdown. And you mitigate it with tangible tools. Pre-written communication plans, clear escalation paths, even dark websites that are ready to go live to tell customers what's happening.
So how do you mentally prepare for chaos in your own projects? I mean, do you have an internal escalation path ready, a plan for who you call, what you prioritize, and what you're willing to just let slide when everything goes sideways? It's something to think about.
And we are diving deep into critical, forward-thinking concepts just like this every single week. These insights are really designed to give you a massive edge.
To make sure you don't miss any of these new deep dives, just take a second and hit that subscribe button on our YouTube NCWEBDEV channel right now. You don't want to miss out on what's coming next.
So this brings us to the final synthesis of all this. This entire deep dive has been about proving one thing. Security isn't about tools or perfect prevention. It's about making intentional decisions, informed by your tolerance for things breaking.
And it all really boils down to two critical questions. The first one is diagnostic. What breaks first? That question forces you to identify your most vulnerable systems, processes, and narrative. Maybe most importantly, your hidden assumptions before an incident happens.
And then the follow-up, the decision that turns this whole idea into a reality is, are we okay with that?
That's the real commitment.
It is. That's the moment you either commit resources to live with it or you commit resources to change it. If the answer is no, you have to find the budget to move that system to a higher level of protection.
But this philosophy of acceptance, it feels like it carries a pretty big danger. You can't just accept a risk and then forget about it. What are the warnings the sources give about this?
The warnings are crucial. They explain how a good tolerance strategy can just decay into a disaster. The first danger is repeated acceptance without review.
So just copying and pasting last year's risk memo?
Exactly. The world changes, the threats change, your business changes. But your accepted risk stays static. That creates a huge, dangerous mismatch.
And that leads to the next one, which is risk aggregation.
The failure of imagination. This is where you only think of risks one by one. You accept a tiny, tolerable pinhole leak in a dam. But then that pinhole combines with two other small, accepted flaws, maybe a delay in your monitoring system and a scheduled power outage.
And suddenly, three tolerable little problems cascade into one giant systemic failure.
You've got it. And the last danger is maybe the most insidious. It's cultural erosion. When risk acceptance just becomes routine, something you do without thinking, accountability just fades away. And that leads to this really powerful quote.
What's that?
The greatest danger isn't the risks you consciously accept, it's the ones you've forgotten you accepted at all.
Wow. That perfectly illustrates how comfort can turn into a catastrophe. So to build real resilience, we have to embrace this idea of tolerance by first defining our limits clearly: loss, downtime, exposure, confusion.
And then we have to prioritize wisely. Use those documented limits to guide where the money and time go. Resilience isn't about never failing, it's about knowing exactly what you can tolerate breaking and having a tested plan ready for when it does.
So let's wrap this up. The foundation of any real protection strategy is just understanding your limits. It leads to smarter choices, faster responses, and a more stable organization. You protect what really matters, you accept what you have to, and you plan for everything in between.
The ability to thrive under pressure. It doesn't come from this delusion of preventing all failure. It comes from the rigorous, realistic readiness to respond and recover inside your own defined boundaries.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to chew on this week. If failure is truly inevitable, what is one thing you are currently overinvesting in trying to prevent completely? Maybe it's a minor technical risk or a low-impact process flaw. Now, what if you took that same resource and spent it on preparing for a swift, guaranteed recovery instead?
Think about that trade-off. We'd love for you to engage with this idea. Share your own examples of an acceptable loss or acceptable downtime that you've deliberately built into your own systems or projects. Leave them in the comments below.
We'll catch you next time for the next deep dive.